Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a breaking news update concerning the growing controversy, the rift potentially between Britain and the United States surrounding Donald Trump, the president's rather callous remarks about NATO troops fighting in Afghanistan. Yeah, but a bit behind the front lines, so on and so forth. And I did a video this morning on Labour MP Emily Thornberry on last night's BBC Question Time, taking Trump to the cleaners, absolutely torched him. There is very real anger in the United Kingdom, and now we have had our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, usually a pretty meek and mild man, seen as quite considered, giving his strongest rebuke of Donald Trump to date, and it is potentially pretty much a very significant moment, and could have some ramifications, some aftershocks. It is quite an earthquake in UK politics, and it could be ignored by Donald Trump, but it might also not be. There are calls for Trump to apologize for his remarks. Loads of veterans, loads of people on the right who are more associated with military and the armed forces tradition and veterans are really disgusted, genuinely disgusted. I've heard from remarks from people I know to do with the armed forces, and also just surveying the landscape. This has not gone down well in the UK amongst even people that would otherwise support Trump, such as kind of some reform supporters. So this is a very bad misstep for Trump, but we know Trump never apologizes. It's Roy Cohn, he was his protege, wasn't he? This lawyer that was part of the McCarthy trials and whatnot. He was the person who I think impacted Donald Trump the most as a young man, as a child and young man. He taught him never to apologize, never to say sorry or accept responsibility for anything negative, so on and so forth. So it is not likely that Trump is going to at all be contrite concerning what he has said. And this then presents quite a problem for the UK, because there'll be these demands. I think Keir Starmer's listened to the people here. He's got a sense of the, I guess, the environment surrounding this from the British electorate's point of view, and he's felt he's had to, and rightly so. But I think if he had not gone heavy on Trump here, I think he would have faced a major backlash. And this then puts Keir Starmer and the British, kind of from a political point of view, in a bit of a bind, because actually rightfully angry with what Donald Trump has said, but that is more likely to lead Donald Trump to be retributive back to the UK. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. Before we get into the details a little more, please remember to like, subscribe and share. Keep yourselves abreast of world events and whatnot. Right, let's get into the details. We're actually going to dip straight into BBC News to just give you guys a way into this.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. The Prime Minister has delivered a sharp rebuke to President Trump after he claimed that NATO troops had stayed back from the front lines during the war in Afghanistan. The President's comments have sparked widespread outrage among veterans and the families of those who lost their lives. 457 British service personnel died in the conflict, and many more suffered life-changing injuries. Tonight, Sir Keir Starmer called Donald Trump's comments insulting and appalling, and said if it were him, he would apologise. Here's our defence correspondent, Jonathan Beale.
Helmand 2006. The most dangerous province of all. British troops fighting and dying in Afghanistan. There, along with other allies, to answer America's call in its war on terror. But 20 years later, this.
We've never needed them. We have never really asked anything of them. You know, they'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little off the front lines.
And it's not just they stayed a little back off the front lines. I guess they did that kind of denigration of the efforts of the NATO forces, but it's like we've never asked them, or just everything he says there is deeply, deeply problematic. So I did. It wouldn't come to our aid, but they did. Oh yeah, but okay, I guess a little bit in Afghanistan, but then they're back from the front lines, and this idea that we wouldn't come to your aid, United States. Well, it did happen, and they fought on the front lines, and Helmand was horrific.
But the reality, many died in the heat of battle and never came back alive. The somber parade of coffins returning through Wootton Bassett, all too familiar in 8 years of heavy fighting. Hundreds more left with life-changing injuries. And they're incensed. Ben McBean posted these photos in response to the president's comments. He says, ironically, trying to convince his parents he's fine after fighting away from the front line.
And this is what's happening at the moment. So many veterans are coming out and are just incensed, trying to convince myself and my parents I'll be fine after fighting a bit further back from the front line, says a guy who lost a leg and an arm at least there. Maybe I can't quite see, maybe two arms. Just no, maybe not. Just the one arm and the one at just the one arm. Goodness me, just absolutely enraging these veterans who have given so much, many of them their entire lives.
Ben Parkinson was the most severely injured soldier to survive the war. He still needs constant medical care and support. His mum now expressing their anger.
It's disgraceful. It's disrespectful. These are the rantings of a child, and it's not acceptable in a supposed leader of the free world.
Over 1,000 guys got injured in Afghanistan.
Andy Reid was another casualty of a roadside bomb, now living with life-changing injuries.
The Americans asked us to get involved in that conflict, so he clearly knows that we were there on the front line, and I think he should make an official apology.
The US, NATO's largest military, did suffer the most casualties in Afghanistan. It lost more than 2,000 soldiers, followed by the UK, but the cost in lives also weighed heavy for other smaller NATO allies.
I consider President Trump's remark.
Okay, and we're going to come to exactly what Keir Starmer said in a second, but it really is very controversial at the moment, and it is the strongest, I think, rebuke, as Beth Rigby here says, the strongest rebuke that the Prime Minister has ever issued against Trump. This is a very significant moment in the relationship between the two nations. So yeah, we'll have to see how it turns out. Now, let's go to what Keir Starmer said, and you can just in his intonation recognize that he is being serious here. This is a strong rebuke for him.
From opposition party leaders very angry at the comments by President Trump about Afghanistan, Al Khan's, for example, who served in Afghanistan. What is your response to the interview that the president gave talking about the British contribution in Afghanistan?
Let me start by paying tribute to the 457 of our armed services who lost their lives in Afghanistan. I will never forget their courage, their bravery, and the sacrifice that they made for their country. There are many also who were injured, some with life-changing injuries. And so I consider President Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling.
I'm going to play that little bit where it says insulting and appalling, and actually there is visceral anger there. This isn't just he's reading off a statement type thing. He's actually accentuating those words in a way that is really quite sort of aggressive is probably the wrong word, but this is not going down well in the UK.
Trump's remarks to be insulting and frankly appalling. And I'm not surprised they've caused such hurt to the loved ones of those who were killed or injured, and in fact, across the country.
As well as politicians expressing a view, a lot of the relatives, some bereaved, others whose sons in particular suffered dreadful injuries. One is Diane Durney, mother of a man called Ben Parkinson, dreadful injuries. She has said that you need to be tougher with President Trump and demand an apology from him. Will you call for an apology from the president?
Well, I've made my position clear, and what I say to Diane is if I had misspoken in that way or said those words, I would certainly apologise, and I'd apologise to her.
Which is an interesting way of putting it, which is not demanding that he apologize, because obviously you get yourself into a problem there, because if he refuses to apologize, then, so this is quite clever of it might seem a bit mealy-mouthed, a bit kind of weak of Starmer to say it like that, but actually it's about as good as you can expect, given irrespective of whether he was Keir Starmer or Kemi Badenoch or Ed Davey or whomsoever was in charge of the UK. To say he must apologize then creates a situation when, well, what happens if he doesn't apologize? Trump never apologizes. So if he demands an apology, he's going to look weak by Trump simply not apologizing. He won't apologize. So what he does say, I think this is quite clever, and they would have probably wargamed this, is he said, well, if I was Trump, I would certainly apologize. I would apologize to her. And I think that's a very, very sensible way of framing that. Some people might not recognize what's going on there. Some people might think that's weak. I think that's probably the only way that he could answer that.
And what I say to Diane is if I had misspoken in that way or said those words, I would certainly apologise, and I'd apologise to her.
So the implication there is that Trump should apologise, even if he doesn't explicitly say that he should apologise. He's saying, well, if I was him, I would apologize. Now, this is the woman we're talking about. And you heard a little bit where she had a go at Trump in a previous excerpt from the BBC. This is on LBC, where the original recording is from. And actually, this part is more about what Starmer should do, but she's obviously also had a right old go about Trump, acting like a child.
Starmer should stand up and state to Donald Trump that he is wrong. He has no right to make the statements that he's made.
They'll say they sent some troops to Afghanistan or this or that. And they did. They stayed a little off the front lines.
We're not
So a little off the front lines. It's just the way he says that. But it's also stuff before, like they wouldn't come to our help and blah, blah, blah. So I think Keir Starmer is reacting to probably precisely this woman and many like her, where he's like, if I don't say something, this is going to be an absolute PR disaster. So I have to say something. And to say, it's frankly appalling is really strong language. It's very strong language against Trump. But stopping short of saying he demands Trump apologizes, because that will never happen.
talking about apology. We're talking about our Prime Minister standing up for his armed forces.
Which he did.
His party sent them to war.
We've never needed them.
And to Donald Trump, if you had a minute in his company, what would you say?
I don't think anything, because this had nothing to do with armed forces. This was him not getting his own way, going on the attack. This does not represent what the American people feel.
So you wouldn't bother to say anything to him?
No, I wouldn't bother.
Not worth your breath.
Starmer should stand.
That's a really decent sentiment at the end. This is not representative of the American people. Now, in a BBC news piece, you had the mention of Al Khan's, or no, it might be in the Sky question to Keir Starmer. Now, Al Khan's is an up-and-coming guy, actually. He's a Labour MP for Birmingham Selly, but he's a Minister of the Armed Forces. He's a veteran himself. And he said this earlier. This is way before Starmer said his piece. And I saw this just after I did the video earlier about or my video earlier on the UK and talking about Starmer and whatnot, and I was like, would like to have included this. So it's a good opportunity to listen to Al Khan's here.
So tracking some comments made that NATO troops stayed a little off the front lines in Afghanistan and that the US has never necessarily needed us. Well, it's a real shame to hear that. The only time NATO has ever enacted Article 5 was after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, when the United States and the world rallied to the support of the US. Our agencies, our forces, our politicians, we all stood together, shoulder to shoulder, and responded. On Afghanistan, frankly, this is utterly ridiculous. Many courageous and honourable service personnel from many nations fought on the front line. Many fought way beyond it. I'd served 5 tours in Afghanistan. Many alongside my American colleagues, we shed blood, sweat and tears together, and not everybody came home.
Now, I'm going to play you the rest of what he says there just to finish off the video, because there's some really poignant words that he brings in there that I'm going to save for later. But really, really good words there from Al Khan's. Now, there are many people coming out and speaking on this, and one of those is actually Prince Harry, who has come and made a statement because he fought in Afghanistan as well. So Prince Harry, who served in Afghanistan, has released a statement in response to Trump's remarks, and this could go down pretty dodgily in the US since that's where he lives at the moment. Quote, in 2001, NATO invoked Article 5 for the first and only time in history. It meant that every allied nation was obliged to stand with the US in Afghanistan in pursuit of our shared security. Allies answered that call. I served there, I made lifelong friends there, and I lost friends there. The United Kingdom alone had 457 service personnel killed. Thousands of lives were changed forever. Mothers and fathers buried sons and daughters. Children were left without a parent. Families are left carrying the cost. Those sacrifices deserve to be spoken about truthfully and with respect, as we all remain united and loyal in the defense of diplomacy and peace. So a well-crafted response there, where he doesn't necessarily go dead against Trump, but what he does demand is truthfulness and respect, which is clearly not what Donald Trump is good at. We've got Tobias Ellwood, another veteran, but this time a former conservative MP, talking about this.
To speak now to Tobias Ellwood, former chair of the UK Defence Select Committee. Thank you for coming on the programme.
Good afternoon to you.
We'll get into the politics in just a moment. First of all, just on a human level, given your military background, what was your reaction when you heard these comments?
Well, this is as offensive as it is ignorant. So insulting as this, I believe it is grounds for the Prime Minister to summon the US ambassador to Downing Street and to demand an apology. I remember on a visit to Helmand as a member of Parliament, I missed my return flight, but I got a lift with a Danish cargo plane returning back to Europe. And I got on board, and in the cargo bay were 20 coffins with Danish flags wrapped over each one. And I think of that now. I think of the loss of the hundreds of British lives, over 40 from my own regiment, the Rifles. Britain did not hesitate in answering America's Article 5 request to stand with them in standing up to terrorism. And Trump now dismisses this and glosses over the fact that mission creep was down to what happened from the American leadership, the absence of a clear strategy, and his own deal he struck in 2020 with the Taliban that led to the country being handed back to the very insurgency that we went in to defeat. But Trump knew exactly what he was saying yesterday. Make this clear. I'm sure he was surprised that Europe finally found some collective statecraft in standing up to him over Greenland. But he's formed this new international club, this board of peace. NATO, Europe are increasingly irrelevant to him. His comments, make it clear, these comments were for his domestic base, where disengaging from Europe goes down well and plays into this narrative that Greenland is not safe in NATO's hands and must become part of America.
What a well-crafted response there from Tobias Ellwood. Absolutely excoriating Trump there in a very sensible fashion. Even Piers Morgan's coming out and destroying Trump over this. You know Trump's made a mistake. Piers Morgan says this is an appalling slur, President Trump, and a massive insult to all the NATO troops who answered America's call to fight with your forces in Afghanistan. 457 British military personnel were killed in that war. They didn't stay a little back. He's not happy, Piers Morgan. John Bolton, former national security advisor to Trump himself. Trump is embarrassing the American people by his attacks on NATO allies who fought with us in Afghanistan, not to mention justifiably outraging the allies. Someone in the White House needs to introduce Trump to reality. And I think what Starmer would have been reacting to is kind of opinions that he was hearing on social media, but on TV. This was BBC Question Time, where Emily Thornberry destroyed Trump. You can go and watch my previous video on that. So I won't replay you her remarks, although they are absolutely, she was on fire. This is just someone from the audience. This is a kind of a bit of a barometer of UK opinion at the moment.
Do you not think that he's one of the most dangerous men in the world at the moment? I mean, the way he acts, he threatens and then he pulls back. He threatens and he pulls back. Like you said, he's just like a bully. But the same thing is that he's doing more U-turns than Keir Starmer. He threatens tariffs, he pulls them back. He's just a dangerous man. He's nothing like you said. He's nothing, just like a gangster.
But what about Greg's point that countries wouldn't be paying more into their defence budgets as part of NATO if Trump hadn't been saying what
he has pushed that up, and I must admit that is the case. But sometimes when you hear him talk, you think it's all about the Donald Trump show. He's not bothered about anything else. It's about how he comes across.
Yep.
He's not going down well in the UK, shall we say. So, yeah, the PM asked about Diane Adorney, as we saw whose son Ben suffered dreadful injuries in Afghanistan. Now, what you've seen is a lot of these veterans come out and say their piece. This is her son in a wheelchair there. You saw him struggle on those crutches with those prosthetic legs. These people are the PR for this, for Trump in the UK right now, when you have news channels showing lots of injured people, lots of coffins coming back, lots of hearses driving through Wootton Bassett as they came off the planes from Afghanistan. This is not going down well, with arguably some of the people who are more likely to be supportive of Donald Trump otherwise, to some degree. That you can argue over that, but I think, you know, he will have lost some of that reform support today. So lots of different reactions to him. This is Andrew Neil, the Conservative commentator that I keep talking about at the moment. He said, well, 1,061 certainly didn't stay a little back. That's a number of non-American NATO troops who were killed in support of US actions in Afghanistan. He really is ungracious, ignorant, and uncaring of such matters, especially unbecoming from someone who managed to avoid military service himself. And he goes on to say later, while we're giving Mr. Trump a much-needed history lesson, here's another. Trump says, so in his other remarks, he talks about how the US liberated Denmark, liberated, Greenland, liberated Denmark. And Trump says Denmark should show more gratitude for America liberating it from the Nazis, except it wasn't the Americans who liberated Denmark. It was the British, the Second Army, to be exact, part of Monty's 21st Army. So just a little bit of a historical correction for the president there. But I mean, it's quite interesting to see how this is going to develop, because this is an across the board pushback from the UK, with everyone expecting Keir Starmer to go hard at Trump. And the harder Keir Starmer goes at Trump, the more that's going to damage the UK-US relationship, and the less able the UK is going to be able to get a decent trade deal. The more retribution that Trump is likely to bring against Starmer, either personally or the UK. We could have tariffs, we could, so on and so forth. So that is the difficulty for the UK here. This is why people keep shining Trump's shoes, is because if you do go hard at Trump, he will likely punish you for doing so. So will that happen here, or will Trump recognize that actually Keir Starmer is having to act on behalf of his country because it has been slighted by Trump's rhetoric? Will there be some kind of, it might not be an apology from Trump, but it might be less of, his apology will be less of a reaction to what Starmer said, maybe even ignoring it completely. So if Trump just ignores this, it depends whether he gets questioned on it. If Trump was ever in the UK, he'd be questioned for sure by our press. But in the US, they generally treat him very differently, and he gets off scot-free oftentimes. But if he just ignores this, then that would be a tacit apology. I would. That's how I would interpret it. But these are crazy times at the moment in the States. That this is a Trump that this is a tweet from Eric Trump that he deleted some 20 minutes afterwards. Understandably so, because it's batshit crazy. Eric Trump: any and all who dare to defy the American golden age, heed this warning. You will lose. Toe the line, or we will run you down. The gloves are off. We're not playing around this time. For now, it's tariffs, but trust me, we can and will do so much worse. So if you are a nation or a politician or anyone who stands up to the American golden age that you will lose by not just tariffs, but by so much worse. So this is a Trump family member just threatening, I don't know, the entire world, who stands against American imperialism and that golden age, and then just outright bullying people and nations. Well, he's deleted it, but my goodness, this administration and the family, that kind of mafia family at the top of the ticket, they're not doing themselves any favors at all. This is a bit of a political crisis, I have to say, certainly from the British point of view. But again, if Trump ignores it, that's probably the best outcome for everyone. Honestly, like, he's never the best outcome would him be apologizing and show contrition. That's physically impossible for him. Is pathologically not within his realm of abilities. So therefore, I think the best we can hope for and expect would be just ignoring this, pretending nothing happened, and just moving on. But this is, I'll leave you with the final words from Al Carnes.
These are bonds, I think, forged in fire, protecting US or shared interests, but actually protecting democracy overall. Now, to suggest whoever believes these comments, come have a whiskey with me, my colleagues, their families, and importantly, the families of those that have made the ultimate sacrifice for both of our nations. It's also worth reminding everyone here in World War II, more British troops landed on D-Day than any other nation. It was an allied response, and united we conquer. Now, some advice for anyone who may be listening. There are two great sayings worth remembering. Number one, there's only one worse thing than working with allies. That is working without them. And when you do, always remember, never above, never below, always side by side.